They didn't send an email. They didn't make a call. They put a notice on my door saying my home violated HOA rules. Rules I had never read. Rules I had never...
Then they mentioned liens. That's when fear turned into anger. Because someone was lying, and I was about to find out who. The fines multiplied. The threats escalated. And when they hinted at taking my house, I stopped trusting them and started investigating them. They ignored me. Then came the word lien. That's when it hit me. This wasn't enforcement. It was a setup. And I was the target.
I still remember the day I bought that house. It wasn't big. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. A small single-family home on a quiet street. Neat lawns. Kids riding bikes. Neighbors waving, but not nosy. That mattered to me. I had spent years saving, skipping vacations, working overtime, saying no to things I wanted so I could afford something permanent. When the realtor mentioned the HOA, I hesitated. Everyone hears stories. Power-hungry boards. Endless rules. Petty fines. But she smiled and said, "This one's calm. Mostly hands-off." The paperwork looked normal. Basic rules. Lawn height. Trash days. No broken cars sitting for months. Nothing crazy. I read every page. I always do. There was nothing about paint color approvals for repairs. Nothing about driveway use. Nothing about landscaping beyond basic maintenance. So I signed. And for the first year, everything was fine. Peaceful even. I went to work. Came home. Mowed the lawn on weekends. Chatted with neighbors now and then. The HOA was invisible. That should have been my first warning. Because things don't stay invisible unless someone wants them that way. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning. I was running late for work. Coffee in one hand, keys in the other. I opened my front door, and there it was. A bright red paper taped right in the center of my door. Not folded, not discreet, taped like a warning. I froze. For a second, I honestly thought it was some kind of prank. I pulled it down and read the top line. HOA violation notice. Action required. My stomach dropped. I read it again. Slower this time. It claimed my property was out of compliance with community rules. That was it. No photo. No description. No explanation. Just a violation number and a fine amount. $75. Due in 7 days. I stood there staring at the paper, feeling confused more than angry. Mistakes happen. That's what I told myself. Someone probably mixed up addresses. Or wrote the wrong code. So I flipped the paper over. Nothing. No contact name. No direct phone number. Just the HOA office email at the bottom. I snapped a photo, locked the door, and went to work with that notice sitting heavy in my pocket all day. On my lunch break, I emailed the HOA. I was polite, calm. I asked what the violation was. I asked for clarification. I mentioned that I reviewed the rules and couldn't find anything matching the notice. I hit send. And waited. Nothing came that day, or the next. By Friday, the 7-day deadline was getting close. So I called the HOA office. Straight to voicemail. I left a message. Friendly tone. Just asking for a call back. No response. That weekend, I walked around my property. Slowly. Like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. The lawn was cut. The trash cans were hidden. The house looked exactly like it had for months. Nothing stood out. I even checked my neighbors' houses. Some had taller grass than mine. Some had faded paint. Some had junk piled near their garages. Yet my door got the red notice. That didn't sit right. Monday morning came, and so did another paper on my door. Same color. Same tape. This one said, "Second notice, fine increased." Now it was $125. I felt my chest tighten. Still no explanation. Still no reply to my emails. I called again. Voicemail. This time, I left my name, address, and asked them to please explain what rule I was breaking. I wasn't angry yet, just uneasy. That night, I pulled out the HOA handbook again, page by page. Slow, careful. I highlighted rules, made notes. The violation number on the notice? It didn't match anything, not even close. I thought maybe it referenced an update. So I checked the HOA website. Last update, 2 years ago. Still nothing. That's when a small thought crept in. What if this isn't a mistake? I pushed it away. That kind of thinking felt dramatic. I went to bed telling myself it would be resolved soon. It wasn't. The third notice arrived less than a week later. This one wasn't taped. It was slipped under my door. That felt intentional. like someone didn't want it visible to neighbors anymore. The amount was higher, $200. And for the first time, there was new language. Continued non-compliance may result in further action. Further action. That phrase sat in my head all night. I emailed again. This time, I attached photos of my property. I asked for proof. I asked for the exact rule. I asked for a meeting. Silence. I started asking neighbors if they had dealt with similar issues. Most shook their heads. One older man across the street hesitated. Then he said quietly, "They did that to my cousin. He sold and moved." That wasn't comforting. A week later, a formal letter arrived by mail. This one had weight to it. Legal tone. Official formatting. It mentioned liens if fines are not resolved. Liens. That word changes everything. I sat at my kitchen table holding that letter, feeling something shift inside me. Fear, yes, but also anger. Because at this point, it was clear. They weren't trying to correct anything. They weren't trying to communicate. They were applying pressure. And they were doing it on purpose. I realized something else too. Every notice came without proof, without dialogue, without accountability, just demands. That's when I decided I wouldn't pay another dollar until I understood why. I started a folder, printed emails, notices, letters, dates, times. I wrote everything down, because if this was going to get worse, and I could feel that it would, I needed a record. That night, I looked around my home. The walls I painted myself. The floor I fixed plank by plank. The place I worked so hard to own. And I thought, someone is trying to take this from me. And I still didn't know why. But I was about to find out. By the time the second month started, my mailbox felt like a threat. Every afternoon, I hesitated before opening it. Not because I was scared of bills, but because I knew what might be inside. Another letter. Another fine. Another vague warning with no explanation. The HOA had gone quiet in the worst possible way. They weren't responding. They weren't clarifying. They weren't correcting anything. They were just sending paper. Paper that slowly tightened around my life. The next letter arrived on a Thursday. Certified mail. I had to sign for it. That alone made my hands shake. Certified letters aren't friendly. They don't say we want to talk. They say this is official now. Inside was a formal notice. It listed my address, my name, my ongoing violations. Still no description. Just the total amount due. $425. I read the line about liens again. Slowly. Failure to resolve may result in a lien placed against the property. I had always heard that word. Lien. But now it was personal. A lien meant they could touch my home. My credit. My future plans. I sat down on the couch and stared at the wall. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was pressure. I called the HOA again. This time, I didn't get voicemail. I got a receptionist. Her voice was flat, tired. I gave my address. There was a pause. Then she said, "All violations are handled by the compliance department." I asked how to reach them. She gave me an email, the same one I had already used. I told her I had sent multiple messages with no reply. She said they're very busy. Busy enough to send fines. Too busy to explain them. I asked for a meeting. She said, "You can request one in writing." I asked where. She said, "Email compliance." The same loop. The same wall. When I hung up, I felt smaller than I had in years. Not powerless, but deliberately ignored. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how one-sided this was. They could accuse. They could fine. They could threaten. But I couldn't even get a sentence from them. So I did something different. I searched public records. HOA meeting minutes. Budgets. Board member names. It wasn't easy. The website was outdated. But eventually, I found a list of board members. Names. Positions. I emailed one of them directly. A short message. Respectful. I explained the situation and asked for help. 2 days later, I got a reply. It was one sentence. "Please direct all violation questions to the compliance department." That was it. No signature. No concern. Just dismissal. That reply did more damage than silence. Because it told me this wasn't accidental. This was policy. The fines kept growing. Late fees added. Administrative fees. Processing fees. Each letter used heavier language. Failure to comply. Legal remedies. Further enforcement. Still no proof. Still no rule. I started feeling watched. Every time I pulled into my driveway, I wondered if someone was taking notes. I checked my windows more often, my lawn twice a week. I stopped inviting friends over, not because I was embarrassed, but because I didn't want witnesses dragged into something I didn't understand yet. One evening, I ran in my neighbor 2 houses down. She looked nervous when I mentioned the HOA. Then she sighed. They did something similar to us, she said quietly. Her story wasn't identical. Different violation, different excuse. But the pattern was the same. No explanation, no response, just fines. They paid because they were tired, because they were scared. They count on that, she said. That sentence stayed with me. They count on people giving up. I decided to stop being quiet. I sent a certified letter of my own. I demanded documentation, cited specific sections of the HOA rules, requested a formal hearing. I kept copies of everything. The return receipt came back. They received it. They just didn't answer. Instead, another fine arrived. This one mentioned legal counsel involvement. That was the moment fear turned into resolve. Because if they were willing to escalate without evidence, then something was wrong at a deeper level. And I was done assuming good intentions. I started tracking dates. Every notice, every amount. I made a spreadsheet. I noticed something strange. The fines increased on a schedule. Not random. Every 10 days. Always the same jump. It felt automated. Like no one was reviewing my case at all. Just a system running. That realization changed how I felt. This wasn't personal, but it also wasn't fair. And that made it more dangerous. One Friday afternoon, another certified letter arrived. This one said a lien process would begin in 30 days if the balance wasn't paid. 30 days. A clock. I sat at the kitchen table again. Same spot as before. But this time, I didn't feel lost. I felt focused. Because if they were going to move forward without transparency, then I needed to understand why. Not just for me, but for everyone else who might be stuck in the same quiet trap. That night, I opened a new folder on my computer. I labeled it simply HOA. Inside, I began saving everything. Screenshots, emails, records. Because I had a feeling this wasn't just about a fake violation. It was about something hidden, something structural. And whatever it was, it thrived on silence. So I decided I would stop being silent. Once I made the decision to stop being silent, everything changed. Not outside, inside. Fear loses its grip when you replace it with purpose. I stopped asking the HOA to explain themselves. I started trying to understand how they operated. The first thing I did was step back. I looked at the situation like it wasn't mine. Just facts, timeline, documents, behavior. And one thing stood out immediately. They never once described a violation. Not in a notice, not in an email, not in a letter. That wasn't laziness. That was intentional. Because once you describe something, you can be challenged. Vague language protects power. I pulled every HOA document I could find. Bylaws, rules, financial summaries. They were scattered and outdated. Some files were missing entirely. That alone was suspicious. A well-run HOA keeps records organized. This one felt fragmented, like pieces were intentionally hard to connect. So I started connecting them anyway. I looked up the board members, public records, LinkedIn profiles, business registrations. That's when I saw something strange. The HOA president's name showed up more than once. Not just on HOA paperwork, but on a local business registry, a property management company. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Same name doesn't mean same person. So I dug deeper. Same middle initial. Same address. Same person. My heart started pounding. Because that company specialized in compliance enforcement. Inspections. Violations. Fines processing. The same things the HOA was hitting me with. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. This wasn't just an HOA enforcing rules. This was an HOA outsourcing enforcement to a company owned by its own president. Every fine, every late fee, every administrative charge, money flowed somewhere. And it wasn't just into the HOA's general fund. I pulled the HOA's financial statements. They were vague, line items grouped together. But one category stood out. Compliance services. The amount was high, higher than landscaping, higher than maintenance. It had grown every year. That didn't make sense. Our neighborhood was quiet, low turnover, minimal issues. So why was enforcement the biggest expense? unless enforcement was the point. I needed confirmation, not assumptions. So I started talking to neighbors, not complaining, just listening. I framed it casually. Hey, have you ever gotten an HOA violation? Most people paused, then nodded. Different stories, different years, same pattern. No explanation, no discussion, just fines. Some paid immediately, some fought briefly. Most gave up. A few sold their homes. That part hurt to hear. One neighbor showed me her old notices. I asked if I could photograph them. She agreed. The violation numbers? Identical to mine. Different house. Different year. Same code. Same wording. Same escalation schedule. My hands shook as I compared them side by side. This wasn't about my home. This was a template. I requested public records from the city. HOAs that file complaints or legal actions leave trails. It took time, but eventually I received documents. Complaints filed by our HOA, all handled by the same law office. And guess who referred them? The same property management company, the one owned by the HOA president. That was the moment doubt disappeared. This wasn't sloppy management. This was a closed loop. HOA issues fines. Management company processes them. Law firm escalates them. Money circulates. Homeowners panic. Some pay. Some leave. And the system continues. I documented everything. Screenshots. Copies. Side-by-side comparisons. I wrote summaries in plain language. Not legal jargon. Just truth. Because if this went public, it needed to be understandable. I also made backups. Cloud. USB drive. I wasn't paranoid. I was careful. The lien deadline was getting closer. But strangely, I felt calmer. Because I wasn't guessing anymore. I knew what was happening. And once you know, you have leverage. They depended on ignorance. I was no longer ignorant. I sent one more email. Not asking. Informing. I told them I had documentation. Conflict of interest evidence. Patterns across homeowners. I requested an immediate hearing. I copied every board member. And I CC'd the city housing office. For the first time in months, I got a response. Fast. They said they needed time to review the matter. That phrase made me smile. Because until now, they hadn't reviewed anything. The fines stopped increasing. That alone said everything. They didn't pause out of kindness. They paused because they were exposed, even if only partially. A few days later, I received a formal notice. A hearing was scheduled. First one ever offered. I sat at my table and read it slowly. They finally wanted to talk. Not because they cared, but because the silence no longer protected them. That night, I thought about how close I came to just paying. How many people probably did. How many lives were quietly disrupted by something that thrived on fear and paperwork. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was proof of how easily power hides behind complexity, and how dangerous it becomes when no one questions it. I organized my documents one last time, printed everything, labeled tabs, not aggressively, professionally, because I didn't need to shout. The truth was loud enough on its own. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday evening, 6:30 p.m., right after most people got home from work. That felt intentional too. Less witnesses, less attention. The letter said it would be held in the community clubhouse. I had been there before. Holiday parties, budget meetings no one attended. This time, it felt different. This time, it felt like a courtroom. I arrived early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to see who showed up. The room was quiet. Folding chairs, a long table at the front. 3 board members sat together. The HOA president was in the middle. He didn't look at me when I walked in. That told me everything. I sat in the front row, folder on my lap, neatly organized, not thick, just precise. A few minutes later, someone else walked in, then another. Neighbors. Some I recognized, some I didn't. They didn't say much, but they looked curious. And curious people are dangerous to systems built on silence. The president cleared his throat. He read from a script. Formal tone. He said the hearing was to address ongoing compliance issues. Still vague. Still avoiding specifics. Then he asked me to speak. I stood up. Slowly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just told a story. From the first notice, to the unanswered emails, to the fines, to the lien threat. I showed dates. I showed copies. I showed that no rule had ever been cited. No evidence ever provided. The room stayed quiet. Not bored quiet. Focus quiet. Then I moved to the next section of my folder. I explained patterns. Same violation codes used on different homes. Same escalation schedule. Same silence. I showed copies from other neighbors. Names covered. Addresses removed. Just proof. The board members shifted in their seats. Still no interruptions. That was interesting. Then I turned to the final tab. I didn't rush. I said, I like to talk about conflict of interest. That got their attention. I explained how the HOA president also owned the compliance management company. I showed the business registration, the shared address, the share name. Then I showed the HOA financials. How enforcement costs were the largest expense. How those payments went directly to his company. The room changed. You can feel when a truth lands. It's like air pressure shifts. Someone in the back whispered, "Is that legal?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The documents did. The president finally spoke. He said the company relationship was fully disclosed. I asked where. He said it was common knowledge. I asked for documentation. He couldn't provide it. I asked if homeowners voted on it. They hadn't. I asked if fines were reviewed by the board before escalation. They weren't. Everything was automated. That word again. Automated. No judgment. No review. No accountability. Just a system that punished by default. One of the other board members spoke up. She looked uncomfortable. She said she hadn't known the details. That this was news to her. That was the crack. Because systems like this rely on everyone pretending they know. Once someone admits they don't, the illusion breaks. The president tried to regain control. He said they would pause enforcement while they reviewed policies. Pause. Not end. Not apologize. Pause. I asked if my fines would be waived. He said they would be under consideration. I asked if the lien process would stop. He hesitated, then said yes. That hesitation mattered, because it meant the power wasn't as absolute as it pretended to be. A neighbor stood up, then another. Stories poured out. Different violations. Same confusion. Same fear. Same silence. The board couldn't manage the room anymore. This wasn't a hearing. It was a reckoning. By the end of the meeting, they agreed to a full audit. Independent. Not their usual firm. They also agreed to suspend all fines related to vague violations. Effective immediately. That word felt good. Immediately. The next morning, emails went out to the whole neighborhood. Short. Careful. They framed it as a review of procedures. But everyone knew. The secret was out. 2 weeks later, the audit findings came back. Not all of it was shared publicly, but enough was. Improper disclosures. Lack of oversight. Conflict of interest concerns. The HOA president resigned. Quietly. No farewell email. No explanation. Just gone. The management contract was terminated. The law firm was replaced. I received a letter. This one was different. It apologized for inconvenience. It confirmed all fines against my property were voided. It stated no lien had ever been filed. I laughed at that last part, because of course they said that. But the real change wasn't the letters. It was the neighborhood. People started talking, sharing, paying attention. Attendance at meetings doubled. Questions were asked. Answers were demanded. Power hates sunlight. And now the lights were on. One evening, I sat on my porch again. Same chair, same street. But it felt different, lighter, because the threat was gone. Not just from my home, but from the system that tried to quietly take it. The weeks after the hearing felt strange. Not dramatic, not tense, just quiet. The kind of quiet you notice only after noise disappears. For months, my life had been measured in letters, deadlines, and threats written in careful language. Now the mailbox was just a mailbox again. No certified envelopes, no red paper, no warnings taped to my door. That alone felt like justice. The HOA didn't vanish overnight, but it changed, and you could feel it. Meetings were announced clearly. Agendas were shared ahead of time. Minutes were posted publicly. Small things. But transparency is made of small things done consistently. New board members were elected within 2 months. Regular homeowners. People who lived on the street. People with jobs outside the HOA. The first thing they did was address the fines. Not selectively. All of them. They reviewed every violation issued under the old system. Hundreds. Many were dismissed. Some were refunded. Checks went out quietly. No press release. Just envelopes with apology letters and amounts that never should have been taken in the first place. I received my refund too. Not that it mattered. I had never paid, but they still sent a letter. It confirmed that my account balance was zero. It also included a written assurance. No future enforcement action could be taken without documented proof and homeowner notification. That sentence was worth more than any check. Neighbors started stopping by. Not formally, just in passing. Walking dogs. Checking mail. They thanked me. I never knew how to respond to that. I hadn't planned to become anything. I just didn't want to lose my home. But sometimes standing still becomes standing up. One neighbor told me she almost sold because of the stress. Another said he paid thousands over the years just to avoid confrontation. They weren't angry. They were tired. That's who these systems hurt the most. People who don't have time to fight. People who assume authority equals fairness. The former HOA president moved. I heard that secondhand. No announcement. No farewell. His house went up for sale quietly. Sold quickly. The property management company dissolved a few months later. Its website went offline. Phone numbers disconnected. No scandal. No headlines. Just consequences. That's how real karma works. Not loudly, but permanently. The neighborhood settled into a new rhythm. People looked out for each other again. Rules existed, but they were clear, reasonable, enforced with conversation first. Warnings instead of threats. That was all anyone ever wanted. One evening, I sat down and organized the last of my files. I didn't throw them away. I archived them. Because records matter. Memory fades. Paper doesn't. I labeled the box and placed it on a shelf. Not as a trophy, as insurance. Sometimes I think about how close I came to giving up. To just paying. To just moving. And I understand why people do. The system was designed that way. Make resistance feel harder than surrender. But once someone pushes back calmly, carefully, and consistently, the whole structure starts to shake. I still live in the same house. Same street. Same porch. Nothing about it is special. And that's exactly why it's worth protecting. Homes shouldn't feel conditional. Ownership shouldn't feel temporary. And rules should never exist without accountability. Every now and then, someone new moves in. They ask about the HOA. I tell them the truth. It had problems. We fixed them. Together. That's the part I'm most proud of. Not the confrontation. Not the exposure. But the fact that it didn't end in bitterness. It ended in balance. I learned something through all of this. Power doesn't need to be destroyed. It needs to be watched, questioned, shared. Because silence is where abuse grows. And attention is where it ends. Some people think justice is loud. Courtrooms, headlines, public shame. But sometimes justice is simple. A quiet house, a calm street, a mailbox without fear, and the knowledge that if something feels wrong, it probably is, and you're not powerless for noticing. That's how it ended. Not with a victory speech, not with revenge, but with peace. The kind that feels earned, the kind that stays.